Forget dusty dishware and grandma's knickknacks. American flea markets are where reality takes a weird detour. We've unearthed the most bizarre, baffling, and downright unbelievable items ever put up for sale. These aren't just junk. They're proof that some things defy explanation and probably shouldn't be touched without gloves. 1. Let's start with an item that beautifully marries the worlds of high art and swamp funk. At a Florida flea market, a vendor was selling a single pristine ballet shoe. The catch? It was allegedly fished out of the middle of a bog. Yet it was flawless. No mud, no water damage, looking like it was just unboxed. The seller, with the conviction of a true artist, swore he hadn't cleaned it. He claimed he found it just sitting there, as if waiting for a curtain call. It raises so many questions. Did a prima ballerina take a catastrophic wrong turn during her commute? Or are the alligators in the Everglades rehearsing a very ambitious and surprisingly graceful production of Swan Lake? 2. Here's a piece of retail equipment with more personality than most employees. A vendor was trying to sell a standard mannequin head that apparently had a mind of its own. He explained with deep frustration that every morning he'd set it to face forward, but by the next day it would have moved. Sometimes it would be turned slightly, as if expressing its disdain for the cheap jewelry at the next stall. Other times, it would be facing the back wall, giving him the cold shoulder. The day he finally gave up and decided to sell it, he found it staring directly at the ceiling, either pondering the great mysteries of the universe or plotting its escape. It's not just haunted, it's judgmental. 3. Next up, we have a pair of antique scissors, perfect for anyone who's a little too obsessed with the past. These scissors had a peculiar and frankly useless feature. They couldn't cut anything new. On a fresh piece of cloth, they were as dull as a tax seminar. But if you tried them on a scrap of fabric they had previously cut, they sliced through it with terrifying precision. The seller explained the previous owner threw them out because she claimed they held on to memories. Imagine owning a tool that holds a grudge, forever remembering that bad haircut you gave yourself in the 90s. Useless for the future, but a sharp reminder of every mistake you've ever made. 4. A solid gold tooth, still attached to a skull fragment. Some collectibles are rare, some are valuable, and some are just plain biohazards. At a Nevada flea market, a vendor was selling a small, clear baggie allegedly containing presidential toenail clippings. He swore they belonged to a former US president, but coyly refused to reveal which one, citing national security. His entire proof was a greasy smile and the line, "You just gotta trust me." This is a new low for political memorabilia, a category I didn't think could get any lower. It's no longer about a signed photograph. It's about owning a piece of someone's questionable hygiene. The real question isn't who sells this, but who on earth buys it. 5. Nothing screams authentic historical artifact quite like a modern manufacturing sticker. In Massachusetts, a vendor was asking a cool $5,000 for what he swore was an original 17th century plague doctor mask. It looked ominous and leathery, the perfect accessory for surviving the Black Death. The story was great, the price was insane, and the authenticity was, well, questionable. Tucked neatly inside the beak was a small bright white sticker that read, "Clear as day. Made in China." You have to respect the sheer audacity. He wasn't just selling a fake, he was selling a lazy fake. And that's a whole other level of flea market genius. 6. How about a card game where you don't know the rules, the deck, or even the suits? At a dusty stall in Nevada, a seller had a single, strange playing card on display. It wasn't a heart, diamond, club, or spade. The suit was a bizarre, organic-looking sigil, like a tangle of dark, twisting veins. The seller said he'd pried it from the floorboards of a long-shuttered gambling den. When he showed it to the building's old owner, the man went pale and refused to touch it, just whispering, "That's not from one of our games." Some decks are meant to stay incomplete, and I get the feeling that drawing this card means you've already lost. 7. In New Orleans, a city where the supernatural is just another neighbor, an old woman was selling a gorgeous Victorian-era baby carriage. It was a beautiful antique, but it came with a feature not listed in the original owner's manual. It would, from time to time, begin rocking on its own, usually around midnight. The seller would just smile knowingly and say, "Must be the wind." A perfectly reasonable explanation, except for the tiny detail that they were inside a cavernous, windowless convention hall. There was no wind, just a creepy, self-rocking baby carriage, gently swaying and waiting for a new occupant. Yeah, that's a hard pass. 8. You know that primal instinct that screams at you when you see something fundamentally wrong? This next item was the poster child for that feeling. It was a glass bottle filled with a liquid so black it seemed to swallow the light. But the truly unsettling part was that the liquid never stopped moving. It swirled and folded in on itself in a slow, hypnotic, and constant motion. The seller had no grand story. He didn't know what it was or where it came from. He just knew it had been in his family for generations, and that no one had ever been foolish enough to open it. It was less a product for sale and more a problem he was trying to pass on to someone else. 9. Every so often, you find an item that tells a story of broken dreams and poor hygiene. At a flea market in Oregon, a vendor was selling a full-sized, heavily used Bigfoot costume. He wasn't marketing it as a gag gift. He insisted it had been used for serious, authentic Bigfoot hunting expeditions. You could practically smell the dedication. And by dedication, I mean the overwhelming stench of old gym socks, stale coffee, and failure. The fur was matted in places, and the whole thing had the sad, defeated aura of a man who spent one too many weekends hiding in a bush, only to be discovered by a confused squirrel. Maybe Sasquatch isn't real, but the sweat stains inside that suit most certainly were. 10. For those who enjoy a side of existential mystery with their board games, here's a chess set found at an estate sale. It was a handsome wooden set, but with one glaring issue. The Black King was missing. When the new owner inquired about it, the original seller had a chillingly simple explanation. He didn't say it was lost or broken. He said, with a dead serious expression, he left on his own. He then added, and I don't want to know where he went. Just imagine the drama that must have unfolded on that 64-square battlefield. Was it a palace coup? Did the queen finally have enough of his indecisive moves? This wasn't a game piece, it was a fugitive. 11. A human rib bone turned into a flute. Some regions are known for their artisanal cheese or handcrafted furniture. Louisiana apparently specializes in human remains you can play. A vendor was nonchalantly selling a flute carved from an actual human rib bone. Let that marinate. Someone looked at a skeleton and their first thought was, this could use a solo. Unfazed by the sheer horror of his own merchandise, the seller claimed it produced a beautiful, haunting melody. To prove it, he put the bone flute to his lips and played a tune. It was a health code violation and a grave desecration rolled into one, all for the price of a used tire. 12. Sometimes the simplest listings are the most terrifying. At a flea market in Nevada, a seller had a small, unassuming wooden box for sale. The price was $40. The contents? Just teeth. A whole box full of them. Human teeth of all shapes and sizes, clattering together like cursed poker chips. When a brave soul finally asked for the story behind them, the seller just shrugged and said, collected over the years. The chillingly vague answer hung in the air. Whose years? Whose teeth? This is one of those moments where you just pay the man, take your box of nightmares, and never ever ask a follow-up question. 13. Here we have a classic cursed object, sold with the nonchalance of someone offloading used Tupperware. It was an old hand mirror, but it had a tiny hairline crack right in the center. The creepy part was that, according to the vendor, the crack got visibly larger every single time someone looked into it. Trying to make light of the situation, the vendor joked, at this rate, the whole thing will be wide open by Halloween. His joke was met with a profound and uncomfortable silence from the onlookers. Nobody laughed. They just stared at the mirror, then at their own reflections, wondering what exactly was trying to break through from the other side. 14. If you're looking for financial success, you could invest in stocks, start a business, or you could buy a jar of pickled pig feet from a guy at a flea market. A vendor was selling these jars, each with a handwritten label that simply said, "Lucky?" He claimed they were special, harvested only under a full moon to imbue them with prosperity-drawing powers. This raises a very simple, very obvious question. If these pig feet were a magical ticket to wealth, why was he still standing in a dusty field selling them for a few bucks a jar? The only luck involved here is for the seller, who luckily found someone gullible enough to buy his moon-drenched pork. 15. There's a fine line between cool historical artifact and active explosive device, and a vendor in Georgia apparently couldn't see it. He was selling a genuine, heavily rusted Civil War cannonball. It seemed like the ultimate man cave decoration. The only problem, which he conveniently failed to mention, was that there was a very real possibility it was still live. Experts later confirmed that these things can remain volatile for over a century. Imagine the conversation with your spouse. "Honey, guess what I bought? It's a piece of American history." "That's nice, dear. Why is the bomb squad in our driveway?" 16. This next one sounds like the opening scene of a Twilight Zone episode. A woman was browsing a stall when she found a beautiful antique gold locket. She was drawn to it, and when she opened it, she audibly gasped. Inside was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like her. She turned to the vendor, completely bewildered, and whispered, "This is me, but I've never seen this locket or this photo in my life." The vendor, without a hint of surprise, just gave a slow shrug and said, "I guess it was waiting for you. Some items you find at a flea market, and some items, it seems, find you." 17. Sometimes the most unsettling art isn't what it shows you, but what it hides. Take, for instance, a faded painting of a woman being sold at a flea market. The background was lush and detailed. The folds in her dress were rendered with incredible realism, but where her face should have been, there was nothing. Just a blank, blurry void. The vendor swore that it once had a face, but over the years it had simply faded away. The real kicker? The previous owner allegedly got rid of it after having a recurring nightmare of the very same faceless woman standing at the foot of their bed, as if searching for a new face to borrow. It's one thing to buy a painting. It's another to buy a potential identity thief. 18. The teddy bear. A classic symbol of childhood comfort and innocence. Unless, of course, it's this one. A vendor was selling a sweet-looking, if slightly worn teddy bear with a peculiar feature. It cried. Not in a cute, mechanical way. He said it would let out these soft, whimpering sounds at random intervals. He even let people inspect it, showing them there were no batteries, no voice box, nothing inside but old stuffing. His only explanation, delivered with a chilling nonchalance, was, "It's been doing that for years." You have to admire the person who heard that sales pitch and still thought, yes, that inconsolable, possibly grief-stricken stuffed animal is exactly what my home is missing. 19. This next one is a true tactile nightmare. A vendor was displaying a beautifully crafted porcelain mask, which he claimed was made decades ago. But it had a secret. If you touched it, the surface felt perpetually wet. Not sticky or slick, just damp, like freshly molded clay that simply refused to dry. It was unnerving, giving the impression that it was still somehow alive or incomplete. Was it just a bizarre chemical quirk in the finish? Or, as the vendor unsettlingly suggested with a grin, was the mask just waiting for a new face to finally make it feel finished? I think I'll pass on being the final ingredient. 20. Here is a listing that serves as the opening scene for literally every found footage horror movie. Lying on a table was a single dusty VHS tape. It had no case, no studio logo, just a piece of masking tape on the front with 3 words scrawled in marker, "Do not watch." The vendor refused to elaborate on the contents. When someone asked what was on it, he just gave them a long, hard stare and said, "If you have to ask, you're not ready for the answer." It's the ultimate test of human curiosity versus self-preservation. You just know someone bought it, went home, and immediately broke the one rule they were given. 21. Sometimes, a single image is more terrifying than an entire horror film. At one stall, there was nothing for sale but a stack of old photos. On top was a single Polaroid. The picture was of a drab, empty room, completely bare except for a single wooden chair placed squarely in the center. It was an eerie but simple image. But then you flip it over. Written on the back in shaky handwriting were 4 words that change everything. "He always comes back." I don't have a witty comment for this one. I don't have any follow-up questions. I just want to slowly back away and pretend I never saw it. 22. Imagine Salvador Dali designing a wristwatch, and you're getting close to this next find. A man in Texas was selling a warped, half-melted timepiece. The glass was cracked and fogged. The metal band was twisted into an unrecognizable shape, as if it had been through a fire. And yet, somehow, the damn thing still ticked. But that wasn't the strangest part. The watch only worked when someone was physically holding it. The moment you set it down on a table, the second hand would freeze. It was like a tiny mechanical parasite that needed the warmth of a human host to stay alive. 23. This one is just next-level creepy. A seller had a small, leather-bound notebook filled with incredibly detailed notes. To demonstrate its contents, he started flipping through the pages, reading aloud his observations about a random man browsing the next booth over, describing his clothes, his posture, the way he scratched his ear. The man being observed was completely unaware. The seller then read the final line on the page. He turns around now. At that exact moment, the man turned his head. The seller immediately slammed the book shut with a grin, leaving everyone wondering what else was written in that terrifying little book. 24. Nothing says, "Get out of the house," quite like a haunted toy. A vendor was selling a vintage child's rocking horse, and he had a video playing on a loop to prove its main feature. The horse would only rock by itself when absolutely no one was looking at it. On the camera footage, you could see the moment the room was empty, the old wooden horse would begin to move. Not violently, but with a slow, steady, deliberate rhythm, as if an invisible child had just climbed on for a ride. The second someone walked back into the frame, it would stop dead, perfectly still. It wasn't for sale so much as it was an adoption for a ghost. 25. Here's an object that provides a live visual representation of your morning optimism dying. A vendor was selling a simple, perfectly white coffee mug. The trick? As you drank your coffee, the mug would slowly, creepily turn black. Not with some cheap, heat-activated paint, but with a gradual, inky darkening that spread from the bottom up. The vendor said it would always stop just before the drink was finished, leaving a pristine white rim, as if mocking you. When asked for an explanation, he just shrugged and said, "That's why I switched to tea. It's less of a mug and more of a mood ring for your soul. And the only mood is impending doom." 26. A freezer labeled, "Do not open." Nothing sparks curiosity quite like a rusty padlock and a direct order. In Georgia, a vendor was selling a massive old chest freezer, chained shut, with a crudely written sign, "Do not open." He offered no explanation. His entire sales pitch was a masterclass in plausible deniability. You buy the box, you buy what's in it. Not my problem. And someone, bless their reckless heart, actually did it. They hauled it away, leaving the rest of the market to speculate. That person now walks the earth with a secret they can never share, a burden they can never unknow. A secret that, let's be honest, probably smells terrible. 27. This one is for the conspiracy theorists in the audience. A seller found an old newspaper from exactly 30 years ago while cleaning out the back of a defunct print shop. The headline was what caught his eye. It predicted with eerie accuracy a major specific event that had just happened the previous week. Chilled, he unfolded the rest of the paper, expecting to find more prophecies. But the other pages, all of them, were completely blank. It wasn't a full newspaper, it was a single, targeted message delivered 3 decades late. Or perhaps right on time. Who printed it, and what were they trying to say? 28. Some items at a flea market are delicately displayed on a velvet cloths. Others are just dumped in a cardboard box. This was the latter. The item for sale was a single, solid gold tooth. An impressive piece of dental work, to be sure. The only issue was that it was still firmly attached to a sizable fragment of a human jawbone. The seller offered no backstory. No, found this in Grandpa's attic. Just the item, the price, and a stony silence. You have to wonder about the person who looked at that, haggled over the price, and now has it sitting on their mantelpiece. That's not just a conversation starter, it's a conversation ender. 29. Prepare for a trip into the uncanny valley. A family found an old, unlabeled VHS tape in the attic of their new home. When they played it, they were shocked to see it was a home movie of their own house, but filmed years before they moved in. It was a slow, silent tour of the empty rooms. Unsettling, but they kept watching. The tape ended with a long, static shot of their current living room. And sitting in their favorite armchair with its back to the camera was a figure. The person who bought this story, and allegedly the tape, from the family online. They posted about it once, and then their account went silent forever. 30. Some supernatural occurrences are subtle. This one was punctual. A musician was selling a beautiful old violin that he swore was haunted, but in the most specific way possible. Every single night, at precisely 3:12 a.m., the violin would play a single mournful G-sharp note on its own. It didn't matter if it was in its case or on a stand, the note would ring out. He even brought a clock to the flea market and let it sit overnight. Sure enough, at 3:12 in the morning, a single, eerie note echoed through the silent field. The person who bought it later confirmed the story, adding that they now wake up at 3:11 every night, just waiting. 31. This item combines elegance with pure, unadulterated creepiness. A pair of worn ballet slippers was up for sale, with the vendor telling a strange story. She claimed that if you left them on the floor overnight, they would move. To prove it, she dusted the floor around them with a fine layer of flour before she left her stall one evening. The next morning, there was a trail of tiny, delicate footprints in the flour. They didn't just move randomly. They traced a path directly from the table to the entrance of her tent, as if someone had tried to dance their way out. The buyer took them home, but swore they were keeping them in a glass case. A very, very thick glass case. 32. Here's a story about a pocket watch that seemed to have a will of its own. It was a handsome, if rusted, timepiece that was always exactly 5 minutes fast. Not approximately, but precisely 5 minutes ahead of the actual time. The seller explained that he'd taken it to multiple expert watchmakers, and none of them could fix it. They'd set it back, and within an hour, it would be 5 minutes fast again. The watch, he said, had belonged to a man who was notoriously late for everything in his life. Right up until the day of his unfortunate accident, which, thanks to his watch, he arrived for perfectly on time. 33. There are some things you just know you shouldn't mess with, and this is one of them. It was a simple wooden box, bound shut with a heavy wax seal. Carved into the lid were the words, "Do not open until the right time." No date, no clues, just a vague and deeply unhelpful instruction. What even is the right time? Next Tuesday? After the next solar eclipse? The seller claimed the previous owner got impatient and tried to pry it open early. The result? According to the story, things started moving on their own inside his house. Not just small things, but furniture. He sold the box the next day, so the new owner has a real Schrodinger's cat situation, except the cat is probably a demon, and opening the box is a terrible, terrible idea. 34. You find a lot of old pet accessories at flea markets, but this one felt different. It was a worn leather dog collar, but there were no tags, no phone number, and no name. Instead, engraved on a small metal plate were just 3 words: "Come find me." The seller, a guy with a smirk that suggested he knew far more than he was letting on, had no answers. Was it a plea from a lost dog with incredible literacy skills? Or was it a message from the owner? And if so, do you really want to find someone who uses their pet's collar to set up a scavenger hunt for strangers? It feels less like a heartwarming reunion story, and more like the start of a very short horror film. 35. Every gambler dreams of an edge, and this vendor claimed to be selling it in a bottle. He had a jar of guaranteed lucky dice, swearing on his life that they had never once rolled snake eyes. A few customers tested them, and sure enough, they rolled perfectly normal varied numbers. Then one guy jokingly said, "Okay, but what if I bet my soul on the next roll?" The air went still. He shook the dice, threw them, and they landed with a loud clack, double sixes. The vendor's face went pale. He immediately snatched the dice off the table, slammed the lid back on the jar, and muttered, "Sale's over." He wasn't a con artist. He was a terrified man who knew exactly what he was selling. 36. This is the kind of thing that makes you want to burn every photo you own. It was a simple black and white portrait of a man staring blankly forward. It looked like any other antique photograph until you looked closer. In the reflection of a small mirror on the wall behind the man, you could see him, but In the reflection, he wasn't looking forward. He was turned, staring directly at the camera, and by extension, directly at you. It was a physical impossibility. The seller offered no explanation, only a single, chilling comment. That reflection wasn't there when the photo was first taken. The photograph isn't a moment in time. It's a moment that's still evolving. 37. A jar of genuine ghost air. Just when you thought the wellness industry couldn't get any more ridiculous, a California flea market vendor enters the chat. He was selling jars of genuine ghost air, allegedly bottled on-site at a famously haunted mansion. Price tag? $20 for literally nothing. Does it come in different flavors, like angry poltergeist or sadly whispering Victorian child? The best part was the hand-scrawled disclaimer, not responsible for resulting hauntings or possessions. It's the only product in the world where the potential for it to ruin your life is listed as a feature, not a bug. 38. Here we have a music box that played a song that was both familiar and completely unknown. It was a beautiful, haunting melody, and everyone who heard it felt like they knew it, like a song from a forgotten childhood dream, but no one could ever name it. The seller claimed it belonged to a local musician who vanished without a trace decades ago, leaving only this music box behind. Some listeners said the tune made them feel a deep sense of nostalgia and peace. Others said it filled them with a profound and unexplainable dread. The person who eventually bought it? Let's just say their friends haven't heard from them since they started listening to it. 39. Nothing brings back childhood joy like a vintage carousel horse, unless it comes with evidence of an unwanted passenger. A seller had a beautifully painted, if slightly chipped, carousel horse for sale. But across the smooth wooden seat were deep, deliberate scratches, as if from claws. The seller, leaning in conspiratorially, explained the legend from the old amusement park where it came from. Kids who rode this specific horse would often complain that they felt something sitting behind them, holding on too tight. So, is it just a worn-out relic, or did it have a permanent +1? Whoever bought it, I hope they have a big house, because you wouldn't want that thing anywhere near your bedroom. 40. Of course, this next item was found at a flea market in Salem, Massachusetts. Where else would you find a tangled bundle of long, gray human hair being sold in a plastic bag? The handwritten sign propped next to it proudly declared it was hair from a real witch. No proof, no certificate of authenticity, just that claim and a warning. Used in powerful spells. May attract spirits. Forget a welcome mat. This is the opposite. It's a please haunt here sign for any bored poltergeist in a 5-mile radius. It's not just a questionable purchase. It's a terrible interior design choice that comes with its own paranormal baggage claim. 41. And now for the ultimate conversation piece, guaranteed to make your dinner guests deeply uncomfortable. At a Nevada flea market, a vendor was selling what he proudly described as the perfect home decor, a mummified cat. He spun a grand tale of it being an ancient Egyptian artifact, a sacred companion to a forgotten pharaoh. The reality, according to experts who later saw photos, was likely far less glamorous and much sadder. It was probably just an unfortunate house pet named Mittens, who got lost in a hot attic a few decades ago. Still, someone looked at this desiccated feline jerky and thought, yes, that's exactly what my living room needs. Some people buy art, others buy evidence. 42. Here's an item that's less of a collectible and more of a moral obligation. Found at a flea market in Ohio, it was a simple framed photo of an ordinary-looking man. The seller had no clue who he was. It was just part of a box lot. But when a customer turned it over, they found a message written in firm, clear handwriting. Do not forget. That's it. No name, no date, no context. Who was he? What did he do that was so important it needed to be remembered by a total stranger? You're not just buying a dusty frame, you're buying a mystery with homework, a solemn duty to a man you've never met. 43. Some items tell a story by what's there, and others by what has been violently removed. A seller in Nevada had a handful of heavy, old-fashioned brass hotel keys for sale, the kind that feels substantial in your hand. But on every single key, the room number had been deliberately and violently scratched off, leaving a mess of deep gouges in the metal. When asked why, the seller just let out a dry laugh and said, "If you have to ask, you don't want to know." These weren't just keys to forgotten rooms. They were keys to erased histories, to places someone wanted to ensure could never be found again. 44. A wedding dress with a revenge note attached. You know a marriage ended well when the dress is sold with a curse. A vendor in Tennessee had a gorgeous lace wedding gown for sale. But pinned to the bodice was a note that read, "Worn once. Bad luck included for free." That's not just an accessory, it's a feature. This garment is carrying more baggage than the entire overhead compartment on a transatlantic flight. What happened? Did the groom run off? Did she find his secret collection of… Well, whatever it was, the rage was palpable. The dress wasn't just being sold, it was being unleashed upon the next unsuspecting soul. 45. This one will chill any tarot enthusiast to the bone. A seller had a vintage deck of tarot cards, but with a very significant omission. The death card was missing. The vendor explained that the previous owner had been desperate to get rid of the deck. When he asked her why, she simply looked at him with wide, terrified eyes and said, "Because I finally saw it in real life." She wasn't getting rid of an incomplete deck. She was getting rid of a deck that had successfully made its final, terrifying prediction. It's a deck with a 100% success rate, and that's a game you do not want to play. 46. This might be the most philosophically terrifying item on our list. A vendor had a small, hand-painted wooden sign on his table. It read, simply, "You were supposed to buy this." There was no price. When people asked what it meant, the seller would just shake his head. When they tried to offer him money, he refused it. "It's not about the sale," he'd whisper. "It's about the choice." Finally, one man, completely unnerved, picked it up and asked, "What happens now?" The vendor just gave a slow, knowing smile and replied, "We'll see." That man didn't just buy a sign, he bought a plot twist for his own life. 47. Here we have a relic that embodies a truly lonely kind of horror. It was a rusty, antique birdcage, the door hanging open on a broken hinge. It was clearly empty. But carved carefully into the wooden base were 3 words: "He still sings." The vendor swore that if you took the cage home and sat with it when everything was quiet, you could sometimes hear a faint, ghostly chirping coming from inside the empty bars. But the catch was, you could only hear it when you were completely and utterly alone. It's not a cage, it's a permanent guest that refuses to be seen, a pet for the damned. 48. Let's talk about an object that spits in the face of physics. A seller had a single, black leather glove. It was perfectly preserved, without a single crack or tear. But it had one impossible property. It was always ice cold to the touch. You could leave it in the blazing sun for an hour, and it would still feel like it had just been pulled from a block of ice. The seller said it was found clutched in the stone hand of a local town square statue. A statue that, according to historical records, had never been sculpted with gloves. So, did the statue briefly come to life, or did something from a much colder place simply leave its glove behind? 49. For our final item, we have a wedding ring that perfectly captures the thin line between eternal love and a terrifying threat. The seller claimed it was found at an estate sale, after the original owner had disappeared under very unusual circumstances. The ring itself was simple and elegant, but the inscription inside is what makes your blood run cold. It didn't say, "I love you," or "forever yours." It said, "Till the very end and beyond." On its own, it's a romantic promise. But with the backstory and beyond, stop sounding like heaven and start sounding like a supernatural restraining order. By now you've seen enough oddities to fill a horror comedy anthology, and you haven't even left your seat. Which of these weird relics would you dare to bring home? Gloves, highly recommended. Or have you ever stumbled on an even odder treasure at a flea market? Spill your wildest find in the comments below. If you crave more proof that reality took a left turn straight into the bizarre, tap subscribe and stick around for our next foray down the rabbit hole. Until then, keep your wits sharp and your sense of humor sharper.